mind, body, and soul when it's already dealing with something that's rather difficult. And then it's also and it's just going to really attack the thing that's most primary in its atmosphere, which is generally family. And so, I mean, there's millions of tales of individuals once becoming spiritually inclined, losing all their friends. It seems to come with the territory. And if you pan out, though, they come back, you know, as the world obviously gets more aware when they get into a situation where they're ready to be real. Really, you're the first person they think about, because they're like, well, maybe she was telling the truth, or, you know, maybe, you know, this is crazy. I need to figure out what's going to happen. I almost died. So I need to think of the person that, oh, man, that crazy person that I used to be talking to, used to always be talking about. And then that's when it comes to mind. So in many cases, when I'm expressing, well, I have to talk about the stages, but there was a stage because at this point, I don't feel the necessity when I'm just directly walking outside or I bump into someone to elaborate on them about spirituality. And it's because the type of content that's going to come out of my mouth, because I'm not going to dumb it down for anybody, is going to be life-altering. And so I have to take responsibility for that, because if you don't balance that person out, then they end up becoming somewhat of a codependent. Like I'm terrified, and can I come over, and I need to ask you about this, and you know, and this is why spirituality was always accompanied with some level of curriculum that involved going through stages. That way, the person doesn't get into things that they're not exactly prepared for. But because of eat, breathing, and living spirituality, especially in the household now, again, we have to start defining some of these terms. What I would say is that generally, if you're the alpha in the reality, and let's just say that alpha is the one projecting the highest frequency, okay? Because the highest frequency is going to be, you know, that's the person that's surest about what they should be doing. It's the one with the strongest will, because the strongest will, the strongest mind will bend other wills and other minds. So what happens when you're in that status, per se, the environment will work to conform to those demands as long as they're not a tyrant. You're not, as long as there's, and shit, even if there is tyranny going on, because even in environments where you have really strong wills of tyranny, then tyranny prevails. So what we still realize is the same mechanics that are in any reality or any environment still apply. If someone is to accept a new way of thought, a new way of belief, another level of expansion, they need to see where that's actually going to benefit them. And also they're going to, of course, need to see that from the host. They're going to need to see that from yours truly, the actual individual. And in most cases, what I'll say is that it becomes where when you get out of the whole save the world kind of program and you just get into it for just pure integrity, what you generally do is when you have a failed case, this means you're actually attempting to enlighten a person about what was really going on and it just totally went the wrong way. You go back to the workshop and you meditate on what it exactly didn't go the way that you wanted and where that point actually was, and then you work on that part of the message. So what I'm saying is that you never actually say, oh man, you know, these people, they're never going to get it, and I don't know why I'm giving it. You don't ever even go into that whole bag anymore, because you can go into it, you'll still come back, and then 2 or 3 days later, you'll be doing that again, giving information, because that's tied into your passion. So it's better to just accept all the responsibilities. Like I said, it comes with a territory for when someone is getting that expansion from you and then they don't take something the right way or don't want to do something, then that is where you leave them on that part of the path. And then you go into your workshop again, and then you find things around that. Like, I'll give an example, like, especially, you know, with the Christianity thing, there's obviously a lot of buffoonery going on. So anyone who figures that out generally wants to go in on grandma and explain to grandma why it's buffoonery, and hopefully before she dies. This is kind of mind state of the save the world person. And grandma's got to know this, and grandma dies, and Jesus is going to take her. So, so when this goes on, what we don't realize is that there's other things that we really can discuss with grandma that will be just as impacting as if she actually realized that, you know, the culprit, Jesus, is someone who she didn't know he was. And so it's basically finding the chink in the armor, because every person that you're dealing with is in a shell and has scales and has protection or shields. Even I was looking at the word today, KMT, which is Kemet, meant shield. And in etymology, a shield connects with a shell. And it says basically when the work is complete. That's what Kemet means. So at that point, what you realize is everyone is well, I won't say everyone, but a great deal of people are at their stages of completion. So at that phase, you have to find out actually where the chink is that is allowing them not to finish. And the reason why I have to explain it that way is because of the MK Ultra, because of the programming, and because of the levels of abuse and things that have gone on in history. What you had was beings that were already nearing their completion, and then something knew the chink in their armor. And that's why it has a lot more to do with the astrology. It has a lot more to do with flora and fauna of wherever you came from. All those kind of things are things that can be used for and against you. You see what I mean? So when you would look into the annuals then in the books of those who specialize in division, you will find even trees that cause division. You will find symbols that cause division. You will find all types of correlations to the division to find the chink in the individual's armor that is whole. So this would be like if you see us all as one big family, which person, as they say, the chain is only as strong as the weakest link, which part of that person is where they're going to break down at. And then that's what you work with first as a person who is working with people on this level. You work with first to repair that area because, the term is best light worker, but nothing like what they're talking about in the New Age movement, because you got to work with a full spectrum light, not off, just white light. But as a light worker in a sense, you're looking at the person's entire auric field and you're seeing that it's mainly this chakra. And if this chakra, which is generally the netherworld, the foundation, is repaired, then all of that other stuff, which is right in front of their face, they're going to be aware of because the spell is going to be broke. Because the other thing is that, remember, some of this stuff is, and most of this stuff is right in a person's face. Like it's common sense, but because of normalities, it's not so common. So this means that if it's right in a person's face and they can't see it, it's not that they're not comprehending it's there. It's that they're under a spell. So then you got to go, and this is why this New Age knowledge and things is only really designed to make everyone forget about the ancient knowledge, which fixed problems. That's really what they were only doing, is always fixing things and knowing how to repair things if in the day that they came unrepaired. So remember, our ancestors had already done preemptive maintenance on if things went wrong. But nothing really never went wrong. And it's because the will for everything to live, like the planet and the animals and everything, it was so strong. Taking it out of balance was much more difficult than allowing it to remain perfected. And it's very similar to when you see a top spinning. And let's say there's another hidden force driving that top to spin. If you try to tilt it, it's going to be harder for you to tilt it like a gyroscope. It's so hard to tilt a gyroscope. It'd be harder for you to tilt it than for it to stay balanced. And so what I'm really saying is that the work that's to be done is done by the most deepest intrinsic light surgeons, because you don't want to lose a patient. You got your own reputation you're dealing with here. It's not about how this patient's making you feel, because the patient's sick. So if you're depending on this other person to repair maybe one of your sicknesses, like neglect or something like that, now we just got the blind leading the blind in a sense, or the sick trying to repair the sick, and that goes on too. But the reality is that the ones who completely expand themselves through this start to become self-driven in many tenses, and this is where perpetual energy comes from. Like, this is the knowledge of perpetual energy as a being, where you don't necessarily need a person to say thanks for you to keep going. It feels great and things, but the greatest adepts don't even look back, meaning they won't really acknowledge a thanks, because that's actually for something that I did already. So even the reflection of that is, I got to look at the past. Oh, you're thanking me for that video? Okay. And now I'm back in the past again. And these kind of mechanics, and that's what really this secret energy side is about. That's, it's probably about 80% complete right now. And it's just amazing and intense because it lets everyone get involved. There's no one teacher. But it also doesn't allow overlapping to a point where you can go through the step-by-step process, which would be too extensive to discuss even on the conversation. And I'm just talking about the step-by-step process of raising one's consciousness into a greater level and all the steps that come in between that. Because we're talking about, again, something that's very serious. So if somebody just gets on an hour and 30 minutes conversation and act like they're going to explain the great arcana, it's not even possible. But the mechanics of it, though, like if the blueprints of it, that can be discussed readily, and it can be compressed so small that then you start saying these little small things to people, and it just burns a hole in all of their falsehood all day. It's like even when you're gone, they're still thinking about that. And that's what's going to get the old wheel turning. So I think that's why they said that those who were really wise really kept silent as a reflection of their character, because silent is an anagram for the word listen. So as the being is silent, it's just that they're taking in all of what this person's pushing out. And so within 10 seconds, you can really, in a sense, analyze and diagnose the person and then give them their remedy right away, because that's what you would really be looking to do. So, but of course, if ego's somewhere involved, ego's looking to hear, oh man, this is great, this is amazing. It's not trying to move on to the next one. It's trying to see exactly how much it can really get out of the one that it's in front of right then. And so, and it's, again, I can only speak on this because these are all processes that I went through, and because of dissolving the ego and then reincarnating it again, which is a whole nother process, because the ego is actually what's even allowing you to breathe. So it has its uses, and it's just like other parts of the body. If they get into other areas, if you allow the lower area of the body to do all the guidance and the talking, then you're going to be ass backwards, and that's just how it's going to work. But if it's in its right place, it's actually the vehicle or the strength of the vessel that's carrying you through the reality. So this is, and again, this is the EverQuest too. So it's quite impressive when you start getting into it, because it starts bleeding into your dreams. And once that starts going on, then you're on your way to basically world building, which is one of the end courses in what we're doing. But it basically means that now the dream world begins to change so dynamically, and it will as time progresses anyway for this kind of individual, that you create an entirely new world there, multiple worlds. And when you're in those worlds, you even become aware of which one that you're in. And then what this one becomes is it becomes like your anchored ground. Like you can pretty much always count on coming back here, but all the other stuff that you have developed and are developing begins to take place on other planes. Not to mention the level of information and the clarity of how the information is presented, because you can feel more of what's being presented in the dream world. Meaning you jump off something, you're going to feel that in your stomach. But when someone's transferring information to you, if you're really lucid, you'll notice that they're not actually using English. They're using another kind of projection, and then you're interpreting it in the language that you speak, which is English. And so then when English is moved out of the way, or which is English is connected to the word angel or Anglo, so when you move the angel out of the way, then there becomes this direct connection with you and basically yourself, the Supreme. And then you can get massive amounts of information, but it doesn't come off as a lot. It comes off as exactly what you need to know about tomorrow. Yeah. I mean, that's really, that's the point that we're working in all the time. And that's a constant maintaining of balance too. Because, it could be one night, and then one night you could have went to sleep late, ended up at the wrong charging station, as I was talking about on the earlier recording, or you may have went out at a party and threw the pH balance completely off. And so it just means that it's a constant thing for us to work to maintain the balance.
So what happens when you speak on that? When I know you mentioned not going to sleep exhausted, but you're in the kind of grind. Some of us are still, we're expanding, but we're still in there. So it's hard. That's kind of a hard schedule to try to get into. Yeah, well, I know even speaking for myself.
Well, here's the crazy thing, because I've been studying the body for quite a bit, and I've been a vegetarian for 10 years. And I started off as a junk food vegetarian, then I went all the way to raw vegan for a while, and then I kind of stepped back into a balance. And what I'll say is that basically the mechanics of the body is very simple. With the blood supply, if the blood is not oxygenated, then it doesn't really matter, because there's only 24 hours in a day anyway, and then there's half of those hours where the planet is really sleep. So the overall frequency is sleep. So this means that the body has to have enough oxygen in it for it really to drive the vehicle. See, because most people are really sleepy most of the day. So they're kind of really below the mark. They're not even like, okay, I got up and I feel refreshed. They're like, I got up at 9 and I ran out the house because I had to get to work and I'm still tired and I went to bed at 10. Now, realistically, you would need about 5 to 6 hours of sleep if you're running on a vessel that's working pretty well. So that means even if you got to bed at 10, you could wake up at 4. Technically. So if you start noticing that people are basically sleeping a large amount in the day, and this is because there's no oxygen in the blood. So what happens is that when there's any kind of extracurricular exercises incorporated to a point where the person is tired, because you remember the body has gotten sluggish. So anything that it starts, oh man, I don't want to go, like I got to go at 2 to the gym myself. And every day, and I've been working out since I was 15, there is always this, do you really want to beat us up today? I mean, so it's always going to say, man, maybe we can go tomorrow. And it never stops, right? And so what happens though is that this is also additional training for other things. And that's why there was always like some kind of martial art training or some kind of discipline training going on in every spiritual system, because it's to whip the body up, not so much as the mind and the soul. The mind and the soul don't run on the fuels that the body needs. But this partnership with the body, it needs certain kinds of fuels that are naturally low in energy levels, even vegetables. Like, I mean, the spirit doesn't eat vegetables. So because of that, then it's important for the blood supply of the individual to have and contain most of the nutrients the body needs to feel awake, i.e. oxygen. And then what you'll realize is that you'll start getting up earlier and earlier and earlier, and then pretty soon you'll just be looking at everyone. You'll be like the only one in the house awake, and then everyone's getting up. They're like, what time did you get up? And you're like, oh, 4. Like even last night, I woke up at 12 and thought it was time for me to get back up for the rest of the day, and I have to actually force myself to lay back down. But the benefit of this kind of being over into that area extends beyond physical health, but it actually extends into dream wealth. Because what happens is that, and I'm not sure if you caught the last recording, but it hasn't even been uploaded yet, but so probably not. But it was on the K to Guy show. But I talked about something very intrinsic in regards to the Pranic charging station. And this is because, I mean, I can be very candid. I have use of my third eye, and I've had use of my third eye for maybe 3 or 4 years. And so what happens with my knowledge is that I can see what's going on, so I don't have to speculate and guess. And it just takes a period of time, because sometimes it's just how the third eye works. Some days you see different things, and as you collect the field together, then you can merge in exactly what you're looking at, because you have to define something on an entirely different dimension in the level how this dimension works. But the easiest way for me to explain this is a charging station. So when the body goes to sleep, just like your body eats, what we're calling the spirit, because there's several different layers of this creation, but we'll just call it the spirit, it needs to eat. And it eats prana. And it goes to get that prana just like you go to the kitchen to get the food. And where it gets the prana from, to describe it physically, is every area and every country and every place of the world has multiple charging stations. And what these stations are places in the actual geography of the country, of the place you're in, that have outshoots of this energy. And it's very easy to see this as like the earth has multiple breasts, and these breasts push out nourishment, and then we go and visit those breasts at a certain time and take that nourishment in. And that's the earth as a mother. And so when you get into ley lines, and when you get into I'm not sure if that's geomancy, but geomancy is using the environment in order to bring up large levels of energy through objects. And that's really what Freemasonry is deep into. And that's why most of the charging stations in most populated areas are contaminated. This means that when you go to that ley line, there are other things that are already there attempting to broker the energy with you. And this is what you see in the dream world, especially chaotic dreams. And this is why most ley lines are covered by some kind of statue and some kind of shrine and all sorts of different things that the Masonry has now built on those areas, because they are holding a vibration that when you're in the subtle planes, you see exactly what that vibration corresponds to. So let us move forward here. So what happens though is that just like most party goers, everyone goes in late. Like nobody's at the club at 6 o'clock. Well, some folks, but you know what I mean. So what happens is that if you get into sleep, let's say for instance around 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, you're at the charging station and out before most of those beings, in a sense, can even rouse themselves. Because it's just like a sleepy person, like they can't wake up at, and this is the whole secret with the occult world about nighttime, especially after midnight. And it's because the energy of the planet is actually in another spectrum. So that allows other beings that only exist in that spectrum to be able to rouse themselves. Other than that, they can't rouse themselves when there's too much light out, right? So anyway, make it to the charging station, then boom. So by that time, around 2 o'clock in the morning, you're so far away from the charging station as far as frequencies are concerned, and even the plane as we know it, you're out of theta. And theta is obviously a frequency that people enter into when they're asleep. And some of the ones are even lower. I believe that's delta. The delta is even lower. So it may not be, but they're very close. But basically, you're already in the beta alpha by 2 or 3 in the morning. And then what this allows is when the prime mover comes through, and I wouldn't see any of these beings as separate than you, but there is a prime mover, and that means the one stirring the pot, basically. Then that's what makes everything churn. And so the prime mover, the greatest reference for that now is our sun. And so when the prime mover is about to come through, where you're at is basically on the tip of the wave. If you ever see a wave come through in the surfer has to be here to begin to surf the wave. But if you're on the other side of the wave, you missed the wave. So when the prime mover in the tense is coming through, you're able to jump on the wave, and then you ride that lucidly from about 2, 3, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock is your general lucid hours. And what I mean by that is that when the body's oxygenated, you're not really asleep. You can actually see what is going on in your dream anyway. And you wake up, and then if you're keeping dream journals and stuff like that, you have a really excellent memory of what actually you're looking at. But you wake up, and then when you go to sleep, you go right back to that same spot. And so those kind of techniques, which is really what and this stuff is factual. Like, I don't have time to be playing games. Like, I don't play games with people. I'm pretty sure people know my relationship, my reputation by now. And that's also why I haven't really made it, as they say, to the heights of this spiritual industry, is because I'm talking real spirituality. Mm-hmm. These people are talking about things that they're guessing on and gandering on because they don't have a third eye. And they haven't activated themselves to any kind of level. Doesn't mean you have to have a third eye. Remember, third eye is when you can see from up here and up here. But you can also open up these other eyes too. And they only see certain things. So people who have opened up a root chakra eye see everything like that. And that's generally when you deal with occultists or dark occultists per se. That's what they've opened up. They've opened up the eyes below their waist. So every time they project and see something, man, this is what I saw, they're seeing the netherworld version of it. And so those who have that more expanded view, they be like, well, I saw something totally different, but I can tell you that what you saw was the same thing that I saw, but it's how you're looking at it. It's through the lens that you're seeing it from. And because those lenses are distorted, those lenses are cracked, those lenses are dirty, it's just like somebody threw sand in your eye and you're trying to look through that. That's why you're seeing things that way. And so, this is I call this realm dynamics, celestial mechanics. And these kind of things is what I know are I won't say going to be, because I feel like everything that we are to implement, we're responsible for implementing. Like, I don't want to get into that bag where it's like, well, this is what we need to do. Man, forget it. It's not going to happen. We're working on something that allows that to happen. And I'm going to explain to you why. And this is something that you always have to consider with everything and every endeavor that you do in life from here on out. And that's, do you have the blueprint? See, because in ancient times, all they were doing is writing down the blueprint and keeping the blueprint and making sure they put the blueprint in stone and put the blueprint in emeralds and put the blueprint in everything so the blueprint can never be lost. Because if the blueprint's lost, surely we are lost. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about a map to consciousness. Because if you don't have a map in Limitless, if you don't even have a map in the abyss, holler at you. Like, the next time we see you will be the next time we get lost. You see what I mean? So usually I have one word for people, especially when they get on my nerves, and it's just lost, because they can't actually see where they're going, and it's because of the blueprint. Now, let me explain this in the physical tense, though. Any major corporation, let's take Merrill Lynch, had a blueprint that it started on. Okay, and if you understand deep levels of business, these blueprints can cost you anywhere from $3, $4, $5 million, even more, before the company even starts. There are small companies that are private firms that they just put together blueprints. And in these blueprints, what they tell you is where to put the company. What is the target market? What is how much are the execs going to get? How many employees are you going to have? Where is SEL going to come from? Where is trade going to come from? Where did the embargo going to come from? How much can you write off? What nonprofit organization should you donate to keep you out of this kind of trouble? And who's going to be your, what county are you working in, and what kind of congressman is also aligned with? You see, so all these dynamics. So this is why every time we get trying to start something, it all falls apart. It falls apart with the second person because the second person generally wants half. And half of anything means not enough for whoever started it. And then what happens is when you have others that are coming in, and then they start to, count the money and count the success, and then they get on their own thing, and it crumbles, right? Because there's no blueprint. So just remember that most of what you see running, especially if it's been running for a long time, has used a specific blueprint or as close to that blueprint as possible. And the core of that blueprint is called the wheel. And that wheel connects in with phi. It connects in with the pentagram. And this is why you always see the pentagram everywhere. The pentagram, people should just really realize, like, if you see this symbol that much, something's got to be going on with that symbol. So it would behoove a person to really research this symbol to see why they keep using this symbol all the time, because it is a template for this particular physical world and phi and how things are created here. So when one understands the mechanics to that, the geometry to that, and the connection to that to the physical organisms, then from that point, they can just look at the body. Like I'm looking at a chart that's exactly like that now, but they can just look at the body and how it runs. And then if they design any corporation close to that, because remember, it's a corp. Corpus is a body. That's a corporation. So they even call it an entity. It's got spirit in it. So if they can form a corporation based on the same way the body works, then you shouldn't reinvent the wheel, and it should run forever. So this is why if a person doesn't have knowledge about their body, then they can't really get themselves organized. And I'll take a moment for us to start and stop.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, we're back.
Okay. And so, before we left off, what we were talking about exactly the mechanics to building something strong. Now, the reason why I'm explaining to you in the dynamics of a company is because that's the generally easiest way to see it. But realistically, it's about an order. And this order, as a king, as even a god. Now, let me explain the whole god thing to you. And it's very important, and hone in on this first before we start talking about the order. Let me just put a note here. Now, this is what happens. Now, obviously, we're beyond the term God, okay, because the God is specific. It means the Germanic king named Gud, who was a giant, just like Brutus, who created Britain, and Bran the Blessed, who was his brother. Now, all this starts with B's, okay? So what happens is that when there's a dissension and a coming into a physical reality, which is what a deva does, a devil, as they call it. Now, it's called a devil because it's divided. So in fact, everyone's a devil by that term because each person has a positive and a negative according to how it's all set up. So just only thing these terms mean is that when you come into a physical world, you become a god because God is the Germanic god Gud, who was a dog also. And this can get a little confusing, but it connects in with why Canaan and Canine and all this goes together, and even Anu and Anubis, and even cannabis. Okay, and we're not talking about a specific color of people. We're talking about a specific era of time. Okay, and then when you get when you understand them, like if you fall into the past, then you become the primary body that is being run in that segment. So the primary bodies that are being run here are God bodies. I think that used to be a term we used. Oh, yo, God body, son, right? But if you really knew what was going on in the mysticism, you would say dog body, because in that state of consciousness of the God body is always in heat. And this is why it connects in with Sirius, the dog star, and the pyramids and all this kind of thing, especially mainly in Lower Egypt, not Upper Egypt. But this is basically about that the dog body has a seasonal issue with needing to get carnic in blood, in flesh, right? That's the carnivore, right? And that's where the term karma comes from. It's basically you consume something else, then you allow something to consume you. That's the whole connection with the carnivore body. Heat, this means there is an excessive amount of mating going on, even without the knowledge of what you're going to do with this child. And we're not talking about just physical children. We're also talking about ideas. Mm-hmm. And this comes into symbolics to why Adam and Eve, let's say the first androgen split, has then another life form, but doesn't even know how to raise life forms. And that was Cain. So it's all metaphoric. So then Cain comes out and he's the king. Because remember, Abel got killed. So who was the one that said that they were the king? It was Cain. Now, it just so happens that the word Cain is exactly identical to king, even in Hebrew and all the ancient languages. So what I'm saying is that what's really being told is a very deep story about the process, the continuous process of not our creation, because we weren't created, okay? It's about our existence. And let me hone in on that a little bit more about us not being created. And this is the limit of the knowledge here in this divided world, is that they don't know where everyone came from. Because the knowledge of what we have here says that everything must come from something. But then what blows our brain up is we're trying to figure out where the first thing came from. Mm-hmm. And it's right. And then that's the brain meltdown right there. Like at night, I used to melt my brain down 3 years ago until I cracked it. Because I feel like anything that I put my mind on, even if I don't understand it, and I put my mind, body, and soul into it, eventually crack it. I set it on that like a computer or something, and then I wait. And it could be 2-3 months later. It'll keep drilling it. It'll keep drilling it, and then it'll drill it.
That's what I was saying earlier. I was like, it's like a concept that you try to grasp, but you can't. And as soon as you think you have it, it's gone.
Yeah.
And I said that's kind of like but the closer you get to it, and it's like at times the longer you can hold it, I feel like that's how you know you're raising in consciousness and you're getting closer and closer to being able to fully grasp that concept. It's
for sure. I mean, and then also, because I've read at least, I don't know, I think I've read about 10,000 books now, like no joke. But I mean, look no further than that.
What's the software you use that reads it to you?
Oh, that's that Ghost Reader. Ghost Reader's a software that bolted on with another software called Convenience-ware, which has a really decent reader where it sounds legible enough. It still kind of sounds a little bit robotic.
Can I ask one quick question? We were talking about Cain and Adam and Eve, coming together to, have a kid like Cain because they didn't know how to have a child. Mm-hmm. And things like that, we like before we came into, understanding spirituality, we were in a different mindset. So we had our children based on, being fruitful and multiplying and nothing else other than that. So we didn't create our children, going in there with
a blueprint.
Right, with a blueprint. How do you recover from that?
Well, the body is the blueprint, but also remember that what we're actually talking about here, because it's taken in the Cain and Abel context, because we're using names and marks and some story that's already been created that works as a template. But what we're really talking about is we're talking about bringing life into an external world, because androgens don't bring children into external physicalities. And I'm gonna break this down really easy, and then I'm also gonna show you where everyone really came from and why everyone doesn't know that they came from that place. And here's what happened. So really the infraction, if there's any, and all the stuff that I read in the ancient text says this was all about experience, always will be about experience, suck it up and keep moving. It doesn't say to reflect on this and figure out who did wrong and all that stuff, because we're here. So if you want to go into the story, though, apparently that there was an infraction because the beings brought something into external reality or world that nothing had ever been in a physical world before, because a physical world presents limitations. So Cain's first issue was he raged. Cain, if you look in the Kabbalah, is symbolic to that first image of God. Because remember, he's the first son, okay? So, but what does God have that most beings, and we're just taking it all as metaphor, don't have? And it's a God, not a human. And where does God live? God doesn't live on earth. So let's look at these as metaphors. No being that is magnificent can actually live in a physical body. So, because it's just, you can't handle it. It's like, it's like someone trying to stuff you into a little bitty vessel when you have this phenomenal cosmic power. So if somehow it happens, then you're pissed off all the time. And that's Cain's attitude. Cain is burning and raging with fire. And now Cain also became synonymous with the first king, the first father, and even God. That's who Gud was. It just so happens it wasn't a German. Like, we're just talking about a story that's been rehashed from an ancient civilization. So I think Rick Ross probably has more connection to Cain than the King of England, in a sense to where those people actually came from and what they were doing with those bodies. Because if you understand Kemet knowledge, the goal is to live on a physical plane forever. And that goal was impossible at first, and then they did the impossible. Now, this is why when you look in the Metu Neter, you find that in the subjective plane, which is they're saying is the plane that all the stuff that you're seeing created here comes from one source. And that source is called the subjective plane. The only thing about the subjective plane, though, is that there's no such thing as what we call consciousness there. It all is dissolved. There's no individualities there. It's pure prima materia, like what everything is made out of. So it's not thinking, it's not dividing, it's not weak, it's not strong, it's not doing any of that kind of stuff. And because of that, and because we were there, nobody can comprehend that because there's no sight, hearing, taste, smell, and touch, or that connects to five senses. Because now that if you only have 5 senses, that means you can only perceive through those means, and that's a limitation. So what we get into here is we get into finding that there was constant work at attempting to create a physical body that could allow at least enough expression for a supreme being to enjoy their stay in this kind of existence. And this is why there was a constant creation of these animals and different kind of beings to mix DNA to finally get what you're looking at now, which is called the apex. The human being is an apex being. It's what's called an apex predator. It can hunt anything. It is a formidable weapon. It has an opposable thumb. It can even deal blows to other universes if it wants to. So that's called an apex being. And the only way that's created is by taking everything in the group mind. This is giraffes, octopuses, dolphins, everything in the group mind, and somehow putting them all into the same vessel without that vessel destroying itself. That's called the great work. The original great work, not this watered down Freemason basically business that's going on right now, but the real great work was order out of chaos. But it didn't mean causing chaos in the reality. It meant bringing all of the organisms that are diametrically opposed to one another, meaning they do not like each other, like poison ivy in human beings, dogs and cats, and putting it all into the same vessel, like what the world is right now, and then somehow it not destroying itself. And because if one could do that, it meant that they could obtain balance, because that's what balance actually is. It's taking the both sides of your consciousness and then marrying them together, which is really what marrying is. You take a male and a female, they're supposed to be opposites. And then somehow they come together and then they perform the great work within that wedding. And so this is what all of the symbolics are really leading to over and over again. But it's just because we have basically a lifestyle that has the same thing over and over again disguised as something separate. And so just remember, the reason why people don't know where they came from is because where they were, they didn't have any senses there. So there was nothing to perceive that space, nothing to divide that space from something else. In the phi-based world, though, which is what the Kemetans created, and that's why it's the gift and the curse, meaning that to create a world like this, to be responsible for managing it, and then to create other beings in it that at some point take over it and then can't even manage it, you bear still all the karma. Because basically, if you're going to be there for everyone to award you, you have to also be there for everyone if they want to punish you. And so this is why now how it really works is that this whole battle, which is going on within, I'm not asking you to look into the external world and figure out how you're going to rectify the situation here. It's in the internal world with your own inner war that's taking place with all of the kingdoms being divided. And these are celestial kingdoms and terrestrial kingdoms as the same. The Orient etymologically connects to Orion. Syrians are from Sirius. They're actually, the ones you're seeing there now may not be, but the ones that were originally there were from Sirius. And nothing's changed. Mars is still causing the wars. Venus is still running around Aphrodite with the seduction on one end and then the knowledge on another. Hermes is still, you see, all of the in their ancient states, which were what we called the guides. The guides or the guards. And the reason why they were called that is because in the houses where all of these energies come from, like this is why when you take a person's zodiac and you know all about the zodiac, you know all about the tarot, and you get a person's birthday and the time they're born, you can probably tell everything about them from there if they're not moving in mysterious ways. If they're moving in mysterious ways, there's just no telling. They probably even know that you're even trying to check them out. And what that means is that you don't have to be primarily stuck in one house under one guardian.
Yeah.
But through the process of how we're actually growing in these universes or universities, there's a guardian over every house. And if you just got in school, then more than likely your instructor is one of the more denser instructors. Now, and this is all going on within. So if the person happens to awake that instructor, which is what happens with many religious rituals, then what the person can be stuck with is a quite malevolent and intense misfortunate life. While if they awake them, and generally people who go into rituals and try to awake those kind of things because of the level of knowledge being all misconstrued, are always the kind of individuals that already have very low-level guardians. Because the whole reason why they're actually trying to go into that ritual and do all that is for fame, wealth, money, all those kind of things, which are basically all what the lower-level guardians are into. You see what I mean? So they awake in themselves, and then this is called, and let me get it factual here. This is so you understand this and how you're seeing it in society. The symbol of this is an inverted pentagram. It means that the energy is going to go down when the person activates, and before it goes up. And so this is what you see in some of the Hollywood actors and things that they've unlocked their kundalini, and you can even see depressions in their chakras and depressions even in this chakra. But because of that first initial experience going down into the netherworld first with Anu and the rest of the netherworld gods, they see the world as that, and they see spirituality as that, and it warps kind of what a person can perceive as their spiritual experience from there. And so what we're talking about is we're talking about looking at these movements of energies and these different circumstances that not only we're facing but other people are facing, and finding all the connections to them and how they exist even within yourself, because that way when you want to change something, if you want to change the future, which is pretty simple to do at a certain level, then you know what exact mechanics to put in play to change the future and to change the environment. But the biggest thing that you really do want to make sure that's not so much around you when you're getting into the lessons of that, especially initially, is people who doubt. And the reason is as simple as the double slot experiment in science. That wherever they thought that these ions were going to go to, if they thought they were going to go through the hole, then they will go through the hole. If they thought they were going to go around the hole, then they went around the hole. Showing that on the molecular level of life, it all responds to basically how we think. And you even see this in the third eye. If you feel happy, the trees are happy, the clouds are happy, and everything's happy. And then when you start feeling mad, everything turns into mad because it's all a mirror. And you actually literally watch other organisms respond to how you're responding. And now I'm not talking about humans. So remember that nature is a reflection of who we are. It doesn't mean that each person around you is a reflection of who you are. And we need to be very, very clear about that, because things that have chosen their own destiny and don't use what we call instinct are now on a different level. Meaning that, so nature is like a mirror. It runs on instinct. It's going to respond to how you what you put out. And trust me, that's all you really need. Those are the only those are the real strong building blocks. Earthquakes, volcanoes, tornadoes, those are the kind of things you have at your disposal. Now, as far as other people and animals, they may not respond. Even when you have your third eye open and you're trying to communicate, they may not choose to communicate with you because they have their own, they basically turn themselves off of being mirrors. Now, this mirror ability is very important to understand, or what we call understand, how to switch yourself into. That's called clear face. Clear face is when you've gone through so many levels of understanding what goes on in the realities and then even the planes beyond, that you need to learn how to turn that stuff off. Because if you can't turn it off, then it's like your brain is constantly running and it's never really getting a break. And this is where the power in the meditation, because when you shut off the vehicle and you close all your orifices, as I wrote about, and you close sight, hearing, taste, smell, touch, you charge. And then when you choose to open up one of those faculties again, it shoots out a burst. And generally that burst can overcome anything that it's firing into, or it can analyze anything that it's being told to analyze. So what I'm saying is that if spirituality starts to become so complex and you don't know how to turn it off, you don't know how to do the clear face, where you still say, well, it's still all me, and you pack it all up. Instead of keeping these external, well, it's this race and this people and that demon, and then they're all outside of you. That's a part of the lessons, right? As you're identifying things by putting them in front of you. But a major part of the graduation from that is putting it all back inside and seeing all these as different parts of yourself. And that's called clear face. And then when you can activate the clear face, then you're not being in the past or in the future. And this is why. Because remember that your feelings will take you out of being present. If you feel something, if especially anger, it's about something that happened before. And so now now you're in the past. And what we require of this being is to be present at all times, because only present, only in the moment can the being be balanced. Now also excitement, it's not just negativity, because there's two sides of the coin. So people are like, okay, well, I only want the good side then. That's a light sider. And they're just as screwed up. They just don't know it. Just like the dark side, it doesn't even realize its level of, you see? Yeah, but where is that person? Like, man, I can't wait till tomorrow. They're tomorrow. They're not right now. They're in tomorrow. So when they get happy, they choose to go to where they're happy at, not finding the happiness here.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So these kind of mechanics, I feel like, are some of the most useful for what's going on the plane.
It's so practical, and it makes so much sense. But it's set up and that's the question I want to ask you about too. It's like the external environment makes it so difficult. There's so many hurdles you have to leap through.
But isn't that blaming it on the external environment?
Well, I mean, we still can call it like it is though. Like it's no, don't pass the buck too far, but it's because it's the crucible. Remember, the alchemical symbol for Earth is a cross. Okay, and this is why alchemy is, it's from Kemet. But anyway, alchemy, they have symbols, and some of them bleed over into the planetary symbols. But the symbol of Earth is the crucible, or the cross. And what a crucible is that it's to put something inside of it and then put a bubble around it, and then to create so much pressure that it basically distills itself and refines itself. And then when it finally makes it out of the crucible, and it will, everyone's going to have an out-of-body experience at some point when they die, maybe, if it's that late. But it will then be 1,000 times stronger if it's went through its alchemical transmutation. So still remember that the reality is the gauntlet. Like only the greatest ran this gauntlet and was able to run all the circuits. Because you can get caught on different paths of this tree. And that's why, we have to refer a little to Kabbalah here. And remember, I'm just versed in every tradition and every form of mysticism, so that I just take the ones that are easiest to comprehend. But the tree has branches. And what the tree is symbolic of is the trunk of the tree, and all the way to the top of the tree is symbolic of the straight way. That's called, in a sense, the solar path. Now, the sun is not a male. It's actually androgyne, and it functions as a male-female with a balance so that it's constantly able to generate energy. And these are all metaphors. So that straight path is basically an uploader. Now, what generally happens first, though, on a person's spiritual path is that they go off into the left or to the right. And this is what the ancients call a zigzag. And that's the path of the serpent. Now, to the left or to the right is either you bank left to Venus or you bank right to Mars in the state of consciousness of the person. And in each of those lambs, as they call them, lambs on the path, those clipo worlds or shell-based worlds, everyone that lives there and every being that is inhabited in that sphere believes that that sphere is the only sphere. That's why they're there. They're like, there's only Venus. And then they stay into all the resonation of Venus. Now remember, the reason why you can't find Earth in most alchemical trees and most planetary trees is because Earth as we know it, if you really want the truth, doesn't exist except for in our minds and in our hearts. That's why Earth is an anagram for heart. And so it's very interesting because you'll have people here that are straight Saturn aliens. Like they've turned themselves into lead. And they're least affected by light. You can't tell them anything. They're dense. And this is why in alchemy, the metal of Saturn is lead. And then when you study the characteristics of lead, lead is least affected by light and very heavy, very dense, also poisonous. You see, so, and then while other planets have different alchemical metals, and those correspond to their temperaments. Like, what's his temper? And these are the same guides that I'm talking about, these guides or these guardians. There's like, you can make a list, and every single characteristic of a guide and a guardian, from its plant to its animal to its color to its everything, you can put all in that one list. And then you'll know when you see a person, oh, they're like 25% Saturnalian, part Venusian, little Mercurian going on. And that's all based on this system that they're in right now. This doesn't mean that these are the only planets and these are the only resonators. This just means this is the levels and the lessons that people are learning now. But the biggest lesson to learn is that they're lessons. That you should never get stuck on one of these parts of the tree. You should always be looking either to go to the next level, and if that doesn't look like it's appealing, then descend one level and see what happened to the previous foundation. And as you move through it, and then you discover greater worlds. And that's why there's chakras that are not mapped out. They're not shown on the charts, and it's because they don't even need to be discussed. You can't use conversations to talk about things on planes that don't have sound. Sound, that's what I say, in the beginning of the Big Bang was the first sound. And the Big Bang is also very symbolic because it's actually, it's literally a Big Bang. It's an actual connection between two forms that are opposite to each other that cause an explosion. But this is no different, and this is how you can prove that this is true. This is no different than how a male and a female come together. And then when they come together, they have a Big Bang. And then something's created after that. And in that creation begins the drama. And then the word drama is etymologically connected to dragon mother, dragon mom, the tale of the entire saga of Ouroboros and all these mansions and all these houses and Sophia and her children and Mary and her children and all these children. And all of what they're going through on their way either further away from the Big Bang, meaning further into duality, and it goes on. They say infinitely, but it's not infinite. Nothing in that direction is infinite. Or individuals making their way back to totality. So this is also really will bake your noodle. When you really realize that, at this point, and I explained this, I butchered this the last show, so I wanted to clean this up some because I kind of explained it in the wrong context, but I was explaining how the future is really the past, and that's a fact. And I'll explain it very eloquently now, and it's basically structured around this, that nothing that is weak is what starts first. It's always vice versa. It's potency first, and then as the potency dilutes itself, it becomes weaker. So then it's safe to say then that the current stage of mankind and woman is obviously, if a person is planning on increasing themselves, they need to go back in the direction of where they came. So this means a person who's actually working on their spiritual stance and increasing themselves are actually, if they're calling that, like, I'm going to do that tomorrow, next year I'm going to be a better person, 2 years I'm going to be a better person. Now, according to us, that direction is in the future. Mm-hmm. But where you're going is actually back to the past, because that's where you already were. And so this is how you break time, my friend. When you
oh man, like, does that begin at the point of your awakening? Like, until, if you're asleep, it's like you're still heading further and further. You're getting weaker and weaker, per se, and you're heading further into the past.
Right, into the vortex.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But once you awake, it's like you bust a U-turn. And you're like, oh shit, I gotta get myself together.
Exactly, and then you realize that you're actually doing everything backwards, along with everyone else. Just like the word we talk about, we're backwards. The words are backwards. But people are celebrating the birthday, but they're getting older. It's like, why would we want to celebrate me about to die? Like, I don't get it. But everything, like, it's after a while, everything you start analyzing, shit, you just may come out the house walking backwards just to see if something may occur, like an epiphany somewhere, like, and it really makes sense though, because it's actually the difference between Widdershins and diesel. It's the difference between, which way are you spinning? Which way is your torus spinning? Is it spinning in like this, or is it spinning out like that? Because if it's spinning out like this, ye shall surely die, meaning ye shall surely divide. Like, die means dice, two. So but then look how simplified it is. This is the Devacanic plane. Everything is created here in symmetrics. So this is why every master builder, the real ones, they knew that what God attempted to do, who was Cain, who was Khan, who was the Cohen, who was the priest king, is make a world or create a world based on duality. And that those worlds failed over and over and over again. All the empires, all the different things that had kings or emperors, which are imps, lower life forms in that state of consciousness, they all crumbled because they're attempting to create something that's never going to ever be created, because it doesn't create. You see, so this is the lockout of their mind. How are you going to create something that you can't even say you really created it, because every element that you're using comes from it. So this is the secret. I'm going to unlock another secret here. When you look at Earth with a third eye on, it's all the same thing. And I can't exactly describe to you what this thing is, because it appears to be everything. And that's when I realized, in a certain sense of myself personally, I was humbled, because I realized that some life forms were on such a much more expanded experience that it was having the experience of billions of organisms simultaneously and learning that way. Imagine you're trying to learn with 1 billion people talking to you at one time. And not just talking, they're expressing themselves and fighting. And how it balances itself out is that, as if one person is here and he's the one with the knife, and that person over there is the one that get killed, when they clash together, they actually cancel each other out. And so as an organism, when you experience both of those actions at the same time, it's just experience to you. You don't actually have the feeling that is accompanied with that. And this being, and I guess, I don't know how many of these there are. I just know that this is one of them. I seen it with my own eye. And what I saw is that this is how it did it. And it made perfect sense. When I finally got a chance to see this, I had already read about it, but seeing is really believing. And what happened is that it talked about, once again, in the subjective plane, that everything that we create here comes from there. So let's just take that as an as-below level. Everything that we create here on the planet, everything that we make, computer, car, chair, whatever, all comes from elements pulled from the earth. So even the plastic. So when someone says to me inorganic, I don't get that, because I've seen all of this shit. And there's no such thing as something that's inorganic. On a vibratory level, now there's a sliding scale of frequencies, but it's all alive. And this organism is using all of this stuff to just camouflage itself from us not being aware of its presence anymore, because we lost that ability. And that's why when the third eye are closed, we see in duality. We no longer see that this planet is actually everything, including us. We somehow think that will disempower us. Like taking on too many responsibilities. Like, well, I don't know. I can't say I'm a part of them because, they got big problems and that's on them. But you see what I mean? But what happens is in the more expanded stage, you're actually eating everything. You're putting it back inside. This is 8. It's on its way back to 9. As a 9 is feminine. It's the last stage of where the wombs are created. The wombs are created in the 9. These numbers, which can make you quite numb as you get into these worlds, are all about division. How are you going to count division without numbers? Look at even the mathematical symbols. The mathematical symbols are occult symbols. Divide. An orb, a straight line. This means that an orb is the symbol of life or a soul, another soul, and then a line in between or a wall, meaning that to divide someone, you only need to disconnect them from who or what they think is on the other side. Like when grandma leaves, where's grandma? Shit, grandma is inside. Nobody ever leaves, but if you put a wall between you and grandma, then you cannot talk between that wall. And that's something we're taught in our consciousness. And this is also why, see, our minds are so powerful, it created our problem for us. Because if we accept someone else's concepts of even what a world looks like, then we become a part of their world. Here's another newsflash. If you visualize your world as a spheric marble, then you have succumbed to the New World Order. See, the New World Order is not the laws and edicts and decrees that are passed. That's the as below resonator. That ain't nothing to do with the spiritual emission and where it comes from first. A real New World Order is you have to change the way a person visualizes a world. Because back in the day, when we saw a world, we saw it as a disc, not a sphere. And then a world or a disc was to ride on. Like it was like a Silver Surfer or something. You jump on a disc and you go off with it. And I'm going to explain this to you. Now, this word is encoded in Kemet and even in Kabbalah as DVD. Okay? And this is coming from the ancient text of Dravid. Dravid is the first Dravidian king. It's the Nagas, the ones that were in Nubia. So Dravid, which later on became David, once they stole the covenant. But that David meant DVD. And now if you look at your DVD right now, it's a disc. And what that disc is also connected and synonymous with a UFO or a craft. Because all those who know about this kind of stuff know that what you're really building in what you're calling life is a disc of memories. And through your experience, just like a tree, every time you gain another ring, that's based on the circuit that you just ran and things that you now know. And so you're basically building this disc or ring or shell. But when you accept too many concepts and too many ideologies that come from something else, you leave your disc, meaning you exit your craft, and then you go and board another craft. And those other crafts, which they talk about in Kabbalah, are spheric worlds. Now, the word atmosphere or sphere comes from the word fear. Because the only way you need shells, the only way you need shields, the only way you need protection is if you're scared of something. And then once you do that, what you do is you create a force field around you, and then thus things from the outside can't get in, but you also can't get out. And so that's what worlds are. Worlds are where collective groups of beings are in a shell, scared of what, anytime they trust me, these Kabbalists, they build these worlds. Okay? And this is why in Hollywood, which is where most of the Kabbalists are, every time they show Earth, it's always being invaded from something coming from out there. To send the message consistently that you don't want to go out there, you should be afraid of what's going out there. There are these big-ass Transformers, Decepticons out there just ready to deceive you. And stay here. Okay? And then also build your shield up because we may get attacked one day. You see, so that is a continuous program running to keep a person trapped from the true expressions of everything. Now, don't get me wrong. Not everything out there is phi based, meaning it doesn't match the same template that we're on, so it looks strange. But rest assured that it is nothing different than what you are in a sense of how the process of you going through the full experience of self. Like, well, what am I really when you ask that question and you're not willing to limit yourself? And so these kind of things are where we're going next, because that's the age of ether. And you can tell the ages also correspond to alchemy, but the ages are all, even common sense could tell you, if we went from the golden age, then we went into the industrial age, then we're going to the space age. The key components here are the elements. Like one day it's iron, next thing it's, once we can bend, shape, form, fashion, heat, iron, we can make all sorts of different kind of things. Then when we went to the computer age, once we learn how to deal with silicone, which is very close to carbon, and then began to create those chips, and we can create all these other different things. But then each time, though, if you ask someone that's participating in the age, hey, where are we going next, though? Because, I want to already call ahead and make sure I'm straight. Nobody will even be thinking about that. They'll only be focused directly on what they're dealing with right now in the little 72-year lifespan. But if the real question is what age is coming next? It's the space age now. The age that comes next, according to the spectrum of elements, is the age of ether. So when we discover ether, which when I say we, remember, this is a timeline is something that keeps repeating. So if you understand how to get to the past and the future, you've seen all this before. Even if you look in your body, you can tell where all this already took place before. You're just in a certain part of it until you pull out of time. So what comes next is that the world at large discovers there's an energetic body. This is as easy as showing someone a gastric discharge device. What a gastric discharge device shows you is that you basically shine it on something and it shows you all the energy signatures coming off of it. Then from that point, if a person feels happy, first feels sad, the colors change. So that's seeing is believing. Then people realize, oh shit, we have an energy field around us. Now, any spiritual person already knows that. It's called an aura. But as the collective starts to realize this, then things really start changing. But the first thing that bank right will do is they will attempt to use it as a weapon. And this creates the first level of energy weapons. Now, Mars, M-A-R-S, is also the arms. It's the anagram. So when you have to fight, generally you use your fists. So it even shows you that the etymological connection, geographical connection, planetary connection with Mars is your arms. And they're often in a conflict. And they're also in duality. There's this hand, there's that hand. Then they got hammers, which is the pentagram. This is called the hammer of Thor that not everyone can pick up. And so this is how you have basically a universe in conflict. But then again, that's what universe means. So we talked about uni, it means together. Verse means fighting. So together fighting. And that's what the body is. The body is constantly at war. Like the spleen does not like what the pancreas is up to right now. And boy, was the stomach pissed off about what the mouth did last night when it ate, because it's got to clean that up. So this is the conflict of going on in the body. So really what goes on is that you can push all this stuff back in and then become Lord over your own body to raise the Jed, meaning to actually raise the pillar that's inside of you to activate Kundalini by finding all these external characters on the battlefield of Arunja and finding them first, like identifying these villains, basically, that are running around the body trying to tell you it's everything but them. It's everybody else but us. And this is why there is no they. This was a big blow to me, man, when I found out there was no they. Because I had gotten really used to blaming they. They was the reason for everything.
Can we stop?
You want to stop it?
They.
All right. So I'm going to explain they, and then we're going to answer some questions. So they, now who is they? Now, some people think they got that narrowed down to Illuminati now. Or maybe Ordinati or Intrepidi, because those are real secret societies. Like Illuminati, everyone knows about it, so it's not a secret. Ordinati and Intrepidi and Diaboli, those are the secret societies. But if you even go and ask them, let me show you how this works. Who's they? They're going to tell you it's the people. And it's because the people are unmanaged and untrained, and they don't want to do this, and then they're going to go on and on and on, and you're, all right, let me go talk to people. And you go talk to people, and the people are going to say, it's them. They are the ones. And then that's going to go on. But then if we go to a court of law, And then we ask a victim who did it. They're going to say they did it. And then we're going to have to go to a person and we're going to have to ask them, sir, why did you commit? Or ma'am, why did you commit this crime? And they're going to say, it's because when I was raised and when I was coming up, we didn't have blah, 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 blah. So who's responsible then? Shoot, it was them. So then so this is going to keep going on and on and on because that's what it's built to do. Phi is implosion and explosion, depending upon which way the star is. This is an ancient Oriental tradition. That's why the Chinese, they still flying the big red pentagram over there and all that. And everyone's using the pentagram. It's because this stuff comes from Orion, these templates. And as Kemetans, we knew this because we introduced the world to it. So that's why, I'm looking at this document right now, and it's called The History of Ancient, I titled it The History of Ancient Egypt. But what it was called is Ancient Records of Egypt, First Dynasty, the 19th Dynasty, okay? Every single thing in here that we're doing now is in here. All of how the society is structured and everything now, not a great job of it though, because what happens is things start falling apart when you get so many people. But all this came from here. So how to manage civilizations and even get this thing going. And people have to realize that there's pros and cons to this because the moment that one race, one color in the prism, one spectrum or one color in the spectrum loses its position, it's going to push all other subsequent things out of their position. So there is knowledge that one of these worlds blew up. It was destroyed. And you can kind of see how that happens. I mean, people are on the brink of it now. If it wasn't for Time Lords, which can stop massive cataclysms by going back in the past and changing the action that happened and then restarting the world again, kickstarting it, and getting rid of the individual that caused it, this one would have been gone already too. Those kind of things had to be put in play. You're dealing with 8 billion people, basically everyone not knowing what's going on, but inside knowing, being made to forget. So some people come unhinged. They bloom early and then bam. So they cause ripple effects that just everyone doesn't even have time to make their own decision about what side they want to be on, if it's side at all, before the world's over again. But this is all from that one particular race destroyed their world. And when they destroyed their world, they embarked on their craft. This was their customs. Remember, the craft is similar to witchcraft. Everyone has a craft or a custom. And they took their culture and their custom and got rid of it and then took somebody else's. And then what this started is a never-ending domino effect because everyone's still looking for what was their custom before they took everyone else's custom and mixed all the customs together and created the cultural melting pot and the petri dish and the colonization. But now where everyone's mixed together, now you don't know your ancestors. You see what I mean? Like, what caused all of that? And so, to me now, because I can recite this stuff for hours and days, and maybe one day I will, maybe go for 30, 40 hours on it. But it's better for me to work with the solutions because surely the solutions exist before the problem. Surely the sun exists, which is the root word of solution. It comes from soul, before anything else existed in the physical realities because it's spraying out the physical realities down multiple levels. And then this one is so low on the rung that anyone that has the ability to go a few more levels up, which is really not that high considering, can tell you every single thing that's going to happen here for the next month or two because it's still yet to take place. And that's even what mysticism in many ways is about using spirit atoms. And I'll definitely give credit. That was Dick Gregory. He tells people the original meaning of the word voodoo, which is French, is spirit atom. And neither one of those you can see. And what it's about is not so much, I'm not even talking about voodoo directly because it's completely corrupted. But I'm talking about when a person understands spirit atoms, then they understand how malleable the reality is. The reality is basically porous, meaning that when you are small, you can pass right through time. You can go right through the wall. But when you're big, now you're going to slam into several objects before you can even move around. So one of the major techniques is to collapse, spiritually atomic technique, collapsing the chakras. all into one chakra, like Russian dolls. So and this is how you'll know when someone doesn't know what they're talking about. They'll be like, yeah, man, I got my sixth sense. That's actually not what happens. You actually, when you get what they call sixth sense, you now have four senses. And then when you collapse those senses, you have three senses. And what this allows you to do is stop perceiving things as separate and then actually perceiving them as the same thing. Again, the first one is hear-seeing. Hear-seeing is a major tool because it allows you to move down the pipeline of whatever is making sound. Whatever is making sound, you can see it like a tube. And then you can go down that tube and arrive at that point when that sound was emitted. They call that time travel. So that means the first stage of our collapsing these division worlds, these illusionary spheric worlds, is time travel. And then it keeps going from there until you quirk. And a quirk is basically you can disappear and reappear. And then what happens in the physical reality, if people don't get this because you won't, seeing is believing, it freezes. This physical reality is moving so slow. Now remember, you have atoms in your body. Atoms. You split one of these things, goodbye, everybody. And you got that in your body. And the same thing, all these mechanics in your body were created by the most expanded creations that don't have no egos because they don't even want anybody to know who created everything. So what happened is that what I'm saying is you have this immense level of ability inside of the body, inside of the mind, inside of the soul, unlimited amount of energies to access, but not accessing them. Or accessing them on somewhat of an idle kind of stance. And so when doing that, the reality that you're experiencing is so slow. An hour in this is like almost 1,000 years on the higher frequency. So this means that a person can probably do more when they're asleep and activated and then be up the next day like, how's you guys sleep good last night? Yeah, I slept great. What'd you do? I think we're going to have time to talk about that. Let's go to work. Because that's how it really works. It looks just like a clock. It's a giant machination. And each wheel is moving at a different speed. It's like the gears in a truck. Truck gears, you shift into first and then the truck takes off. And by the time you're in fifth gear, you're only going 60 miles an hour, but you got there really fast. And versus if you change truck gears to, regular car gears, that's what you're dealing with. So big cogs move small cogs around really fast. Why? If you get on the big cog, that thing moving so slow. The small cog is just, you see what I mean? This is how you should look at the times, right? And then when you know how to phase lock and go into different frequencies, and that's why it's important to get aware of the other vehicles. Now, this car, it's nice. I like it. I tuned it up. It needs tuning. It's almost crash landed when most people figure out what's going on. But this 5-base body does have a lot of power and ability, and it does have a limitation. That's why it's called Lord Governor. The governor's symbol is a pentagram most of the time, and it's because it governs the abilities and powers. It doesn't let you go supernova right there at the football game because you got too excited, because it has things that even at a certain point, you just shut off. In certain Kundalini awakenings, the body's like 2 months ago, it happened to me. I wasn't doing it. This was one of the most abrupt experiences. I wasn't even doing anything. That's what I actually kept saying. I wasn't even doing anything because generally I'm always up to something trying to provoke the body to activate. I've spent years doing that, right? But this time I was just on my way to the sauna, and then I started feeling this strange energy in my stomach, like I was having a baby. And then all of a sudden it just and the energy got so high, and I just passed out. And I was laying there on the floor, and even when I was like, there was so much energy coursing through my body, the only thing I could think about was, oh my goodness, I'm activating and I can't handle it. This is literally what I was thinking before everything just started getting white, and I couldn't even really, and then what came to my mind was that, see, what's happening to you right now, because I always got that voice running, is actually what's going to happen to everybody. And if you're not prepared for it, it's going to be just like this. And you're not going to be able to maintain yourself in a physical reality because you haven't worked on your vehicle enough. You don't have the ability yet to hold the charge. And what we told you, and this we is a collective group of us, is that it's groupthink. So as you're continuously getting stronger in this energy, which is not going to stop, you have to still work on ways to spread this energy more, because how you guys function is as a group. You have capacitors, you have generators, you have regulators, you have batteries, and nobody is functioning as all of those at once when trying to hold this energy, because it's impossible. So when the modern secret societies, they discovered how to activate the human body. They discovered Ubermensch, and they locked it away. They cannot become it. It changes who they are if they can handle themselves with it. So they don't have an interest in activating, because an activated person has all their chakras open. This means that you can feel everything. So the first thing you feel is earth, because her cries are the loudest. And then you realize, I can't do this anymore. So these modern secret societies are not interested in activating any of their adherents, because the last thing they want is for them to wake up to see that the earth is really alive and the ground that they're walking on is actually alive. But it's not just seeing it, they also feel it. Because then that stops the party, that stops the show. They won't do what they're doing anymore. They can't. So the best thing is to come up with some illusionary version of activation, which basically says you're Grand Inquisitor Inspector and you're activated at the 32nd degree. You know, and just take that title and then take this check and make sure you pay your dues, and that's it.
That's because they're not realizing, in order for them to not feel that pain when they first activate and they feel the pain of the earth, is to share it. They'd rather keep it to themselves and just not do it and do what you're talking about, is this 32nd degree Freemason type level of it.
Yeah, because it's hidden within Pharaoh's heart was hardened.
Mm.
Because remember, Pharaoh is not a term that any of the combatants were using. So Pharaoh's heart became hardened, which is a metaphor. It means that they don't feel what they're doing, the kings and the queens and the ones in rulership, because they have been made not to feel. And that makes them Saturnalians, because they can't be affected by light. And again, it's not a black or white thing, but the dark cannot comprehend the light. Let's always remember that. And in many cases, it works the other way, that the light has a hard time understanding what the darkness is really doing and why it's doing that. But the balanced person gets the whole thing. Because remember, in the end of the game, the king and the pawn go back in the same box. So there's a part of this that you just unload the program, and that's what I would call clear face. It's necessary to figure all this out, but once figuring it out, solve. As you see at every end of the alchemical recipe, solve is at the end, meaning understand how to dissolve it into the heat of the sun. Burn off all the impurities of it, and then take the potent part of it. Because their experience in the reality is dynamic. When you can just realize even that you're here, that just can do you just enough. Like, man, I'm here, and all this just running around me, and who even started this? But we know it started somewhere, and you can start juicing yourself on that alone. But at the same time, at some point, the being has to be able to say, okay, I'm gonna eat this. It's bitter medicine, but I realize at every stance in which I'm projecting now. I'm projecting this world, and you take responsibility for the world. You see when you don't take responsibility for something, you can't actually control it. Then stuff's just happening until they stop doing this to me. It's them now. Now you're back to they. Now it's got to be them. They have to stop it in order for you to stop being punished. And this is not where you want to be at in this whole thing. Where you want to be is that you decide when it happens. And in order for you to do that, though, you have to take responsibility for whatever it really is. And that's as the originators, that's what puts you back into an originator role. As originator, you still say, okay, yes, I can see these microcosmic versions of what happened on the bigger scale in my life. Like, even me personally, I just recently had a daughter, and man, nobody really, I feel, warns people enough about exactly how complex it is to raise a child in conjunction with dealing with the world.
And trying to activate.
I mean, don't even put that on the list.
And that's what we wanted to talk to you about.
All right, that's something that we
wanted to get your experience, because it always sticks in my mind the analogy that you used with like trying to activate. It's like you're a spaceship flying through space, and you're trying to repair the ship while flying the ship at the same time, because you can't land it. You're still flying through, and then it's like you got 3 mini ships with you that you're trying to get repaired too, because you didn't even build them right, because when you built them, you were jacked up.
And build is the perfect thing. And And don't get me wrong, there's nothing that can be repaired. Anything can be accomplished as long as you have the knowledge that takes you to the future of when it was accomplished. Okay, so that's the most important thing, is that knowledge is the future. Like it's not saying knowledge is the future, like we need to have knowledge and that's the way to the future. No, knowledge really is the future, because if you have enough knowledge, there is a part in the future where anything that you've done that you may feel like you need to balance out, the knowledge can get you to that point in the future where that actually got balanced out. Okay, so the thing about, especially with having children, is the seed itself, and the seed. And this is just preemptive, like in the future, if we choose to have any children, or anyone listening choose to have any children, should know from the male standpoint, the seed should be cultivated because it produces a different kind of child. And the cultivation of the seed is when the male is actually, of course, holding the semen, and that's Montauk Chai's multi-orgasmic man. It doesn't mean that you're just celibate. It means that you understand how to cycle the energy in semen up the spine, because that's the male fuel supply. And then those semen are like OG Kush. They're not the same as regular dirt weed, meaning that they actually have been fermented, and they've grown up as seeds themselves. They've been in the incubator a lot longer, so they understand more about the mechanics of the reality, which they're experiencing through you. And then when the seed is planted, then one must figure out completely what grounds can handle this seed. And analyzing that, like from the parable of the sower. Is this person susceptible to the birds plucking up their seed? Is the ground really fertile? All these kind of things are what to be examined, which would be examined by any farmer before he spends all his time in the field planting anything, because that work ain't going to be pulled back, right? So they're going to make sure that they're going to plant the seeds in a place that they're going to grow. Remember, none of this is now accounted for when we're producing children. So again, the history is continuing to repeat itself, but we got the panacea, which is basically being able to make a cripple climb trees. You can make anything that's in the reality that's in balance based on yourself. When you attain balance, it balances out all your actions, because you're like a human organ. Then you're emitting this balance in all the biorhythmically connected things that are around you. Anything that you create reflects that balance. So then, what happens though is that to understand, like what I've been dealing with personally with raising a child, is now, first of all, like I have a very strong aura. Like I work a lot on my aura, and so what that does is it holds a field. So there's literally like a quasi bubble, if you may, around a large radius of where I am, and all of the other bubbles are most of the time inside of that, and that does allow them to nurture themselves into an environment. Now, with my daughter in specific. When I did have her, I was using the process of cultivating the seed. And with this child is, and she's not vaccinated. So, I mean, she doesn't sleep really. She doesn't get sick. She's 1 year old. She's already doing her talking. She's already doing a lot of different things that when we see her around the other kids, if in the event that she's around other kids, she just has to go in with the kids that are like 5 or 6 because of how independent her character is and things. But the same things that every child deals with are still prevalent. It's just amplified. So I always have this joke about vaccinated parents and non-vaccinated kids. It's just, oh my goodness.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
work on getting your sleep. It's like they're awake all the time and you're like, oh, I guess just barely hanging on. Let me just take a goji berry or something here. But so what I've been working with is that I've been using a lot of common sense, and a lot of this you can read about, I believe, in the Montessori teaching, which is a school that's been up for quite a bit of time. And the way they teach, they don't start the child off with curriculum, basically. They start the child off with integrating with the reality, animals, those kind of things, blocks, paintings, cleaning things, understanding how to be potty trained, just the things that allow the child to see what the mechanics to life are, more so than hammering them with a curriculum right away. It's obviously because they have to make it in the world that they're going to need to learn something. But remember, I'm not anti-technology either. Like some people are very anti-technology, and they just want to eliminate any kind of help. It's like I talked about today or the other day on my Facebook about there's a documentary I watched from Vice News, and it's called Last Chance High, and it's about basically a school in Chicago that is for children that have been kicked out of school. And man, it's off the chain. Like, I mean, in many parts of the documentary, it just moves you to tears because you see the real time situation. But What happens though, if you don't get your thinkers up front to that use the same thing, like the same thing how I figured out all this stuff about spirituality, I can just turn the beam on that. Because what you're really doing is you have this big ass beam, excuse my language, but it's like a laser. And anything you focus the laser on, you can give power to it. You can bring light to it once you get your consciousness honed in. So they can ask you a question about stuff that you don't even know anything about, and you only need to ask a few more questions to get a firm understanding, and then speak on it as if you have been doing it all your life. So when it comes to its problems, then is what I'm saying, you're the guy to call, because you could solve all problems, because you could just put all the pieces in another context and then figure out how you would have solved it that way. But it's simple with this kind of thing. Not so simple, I'll say, because how long it would take to implement if there wasn't more people into stuff like this. But this is what happens. Anytime that a person, first of all, environment is the number one thing that affects the DNA. If you want to understand DNA, and all the studies have been done on DNA, and what was concluded is that environment controls more of the DNA even than the person's mind. And this is because they're constantly soaked in the environment and constantly exposed to it. So if you have these children, even at this school that's supposed to be helping them or doing anything that's supposed to be helping them, but overall the hours of their day is still spent in that same kind of environment, in that nucleus, then there won't be really any changes on a level that's ever going to be effective. They may regress for a moment from their current behavior, but then pick it up even stronger at another point because it's still the environment. And the environment that they're seeing the most is in their dreams. So the effects of PTSD and in conflictive realities reflect more in a child's dream than it does actually in waking state. It's just most don't examine the dreams, like Freud and Jung based all of their concepts and theories and everything were off of dreams because of how much it's intrinsic on investigating what a person has going on that they are not going to tell you. And so in conclusion, what I was saying is that, first of all, virtual reality has now been introduced, which is basically the Oculus Rift is one of them. And what this really is the same thing in the dream world. Dream world is like virtual reality. And because I know about both of these topics and I have virtual reality device at the house, then I see where the connection is. Like basically, when you're in the dream and you're on top of the building, you jump, you feel the G's in your stomach that you're falling. And this is generally what keeps people from flying in the dream, which you can fly in the dream, of course. But because when you jump off something, you feel like, shit, I'm going to fall and then I'm going to die, then you don't fly. And this is a step-by-step of how the dream world is really built. The dream world is built on how we perceive the physical world. So anyway, let me fast forward here. So what happens is that if you would take this child and put this child into an environment, let's say 2-3 hours in the Oculus Rift daily, the actual game is designed as just an open source reality in which the child can interact with other things besides what's in their environment. It would only be probably a week and a half before you would see a drastic recovery in this child's behavior. Because the only thing that's really happening, which is what most of these children are complaining about, is that their environment as a big fish is too small. So the places that they have access to is always trying to control them. People are trying to control them. They grab in their arms, and then they got to go home, deal with their mother, and then she may be on some drugs, and then it's just repetition every day. So they're never getting a chance to step out. So what happens, though, is that if you introduce something like this, people say, well, no, we need to work with spirituality. Technology has never been a solution. But they'll be telling you this on Skype or telling you this on Facebook. And what I see these days, and I watch it all over the world, like I watch, what's going on in Baghdad and what's going on in Syria and all these different places, and it's all really the same thing. It's just the frustrations of not being able to get out of this shell that we've built around ourselves and getting no rope into a reality that is not like that to begin to control what does really belong to you. See, this reality doesn't belong to us. It belongs to all of us. It is a collective build, and that's why the strongest mind or strongest projection of the reality will win. And right now, it's depression. The reality is depressed. The trees can actually move. When they're in another frequency, they can move. But in this frequency, they're stuck. So what happens is that in that grander state of consciousness, that's when we start getting that's when things start moving. That's when the foundation starts to shake. And so what we should do, well, I can't say what we should do, what we get a chance to do if we want to do it, is start looking intrinsically at what we have available in this reality now to allow our children to utilize that will give them the window into other worlds and how those worlds really function. And break spatials mainly. The first spatial broke is flying, because generally human can't fly. And this then signifies how many directions you can go in. And that's actually how you gauge a being. You gauge a being by how many directions it can move in on the spiritual plane. That's just some of the more adept knowledge. But humans, they generally front, back, left, right, not up, as far as by themselves. So to gain another spatial, you need to be able to fly. So all you need is a simple sim. This sim is you fly all day in virtual reality for about 3 hours. It won't be long till the child starts flying in the dream. And once they start flying in the dream, they defy the laws of that world that is appearing in their dream. And then it becomes an illusion. And then they gain back control over the world that really belongs to them, which is their own inner world, that inner space, as it's called. And that's, again, one problem solved. Okay, but now this problem is crowdfunding. That's how you solve that problem. You introduce the whole thing. You explain how it's going to work. You need the developers of the game. It just so happens Oculus is an open source device. You can program in Unreal, Creative, all those different programs that make some of the best games that they see today. And all you're doing is creating a world that it could look like Costa Rica. And they're going to enjoy being in there because how VR is accomplished is zero latency in your head, meaning that you put on these goggles, and when you turn like this, inside it looks like this. And this tricks the shit out of the mind. Excuse my language again, but it is so interesting to me as how easy it is to trick consciousness. This is also why I started really looking at, I started kind of with optical illusions. And that was the first thing that really started getting me going. And then in virtual reality, you see the height of that what's real is what you think, what the mind thinks it's looking at, not what you think you're looking at, because the mind gets it first and processes it so fast, then it sends the message to you. That's how it's all working. So it's not you really controlling whether you think that this reality is real until you get onto that level, because before then, it's just instinct. It's what you've been trained to believe is real. Like, you can't walk through that wall, right? I can talk about a time where I went into a high frequency and I was told to walk through the wall. Actually, not to walk through it, to run through it. And because of how much I had already experienced to that point, I took off running. And I hit the wall, but it was a good try. What I'm saying is that I mean, there was already so much going on before that. I said, you're right. But then they were like, no, it's a metaphor. I was like, oh, it's a metaphor. But on one occasion, to clean it up, I went into the higher frequency, and what began to happen was I can see through the wall into other apartment buildings, like the people next door and the people next door, and I was able to see that, and then that started concaving itself into itself, and then I started seeing larger organisms that were in fact connected to those people. And then once I saw that, I just chose not to see anymore, and I looked down because it was really, I just didn't know how to take that, because I didn't know anything about oversouls. I didn't know anything about silver lines and people on silver lines being basically tethered to their oversoul, just so when they go nuts or do something crazy, there is something monitoring that and can prevent things from occurring. But the big stage, and we're ending the last 10 minutes, a big stage, and we're going to close in with the children, but a big stage which we talk about in this curriculum, one of the final phases is called the Oversoul. And this is basically, because the Oversoul can't be seen, and I can't stress to people enough, just don't see any of these things as, especially human beings or entities, but more of introspection, that what this really is it's not like a consciousness as we know it. It's just like a hard drive of some sort. And it's just storing all the experiences that we're having, just like DNA does. All DNA is doing is eating up the experiences, packing them away in the RNA, I believe, and then doing it again. And that's its job. So somehow this thing is connected to that process too. But you have the ability to upload yourself into it and become it. And then when you do that, you begin to control all of the subsequent yous that are scattered across the dimension, because we are simultaneous. There are some sequentials. Sequential means a being that's coming back over and over again, and staying in that same existence. A simultaneous is a being that has multiple versions of itself running on the platform at the same time. Just in case if one is killed, there's always at least 50 other ones still running. And this is just something that we learn how to do. And that's what I was saying. The Cometans, they were doing all this. They were the first ones to figure out how all that really worked and how to really make that possible. And in fact, I believe that they created it, because other than that, there was nothing else to create anything. You see what I mean? It had to all jump off from somewhere. And from what I'm reading in my studies and what I've seen in my experiences, that this is where this comes from. So in conclusion with the children is to realize that, first of all, when a child is conceived, what goes on is that when the two parents come together, they begin to rub together because they're phi. So the symbol of the X, which is what you see when you look down on a pyramid, is also what we call 10 in Roman numerals. Okay? And this is because on the bottom of the pyramid, there's another pyramid that has the exact same size. So the pyramid is actually what would be a diamond or a rhombus. Okay? And so this template is letting us understand to a certain degree how the body is designed. And I'm catching my state of mind here because I really want to explain exactly what goes on, again, when children are birthed. So what happens is that 5 and 5 come together, or phi and phi come together, and they make 10. Meaning they bring a child into a dualistic world that has zeros and ones. Again, when phi and phi come together, which are two shells, they make this shape, which we call the heart. Okay, now look at a shell from the side when it's cracked. Crack open a piece of shell and look at it from the side. It's a symbol like this. It looks like a 9 kind of without connecting. It's a 9. When you put two 9s together, they make a symbol that looks like a heart, and that's also called a Vive. So the heart symbol, which is really a Venusian symbol, at first came from Venus because Venus is connected to phi. Venus is known to come from the shell. So what I'm explaining is that, and Venus is in charge of the love, right? So two people come together, and then 2 5 come together and they make 10, and then they birth this being into a physical world. Now, how this looks on the spiritual plane is it looks like a light. These two people start coming together, they come together, and they start the friction, which is going on. And then as the friction begins to build, there is a climax point. And what this looks like on the astral plane is this light. But all the lights are different colors. There's no light that is the same spectrum. And it's because there's no two people that are the same. Even what you ate today changes you forevermore from tomorrow. You'll never be able to get to that point again. Even there's other things in your reality that are affecting the frequency of the reality, allowing you to only be in this point at one time. So on the astral plane, what this child sees when it's coming into conception from inception. Remember, the child is already existing. It's been incepted. This inception is generally a collective between the mother and the father that took place at another point. It could have been early in their lives. It's a commitment when we say we're going to be together. From that point, a child could be incepted right then. There's many children that are not in the physical reality that people have around them all the time. But the ones that make it into the physical reality make it from inception to conception. And boy,
and seed.
Say it again.
That begins with the man's seed that's cycling through him.
Well,
does that have a correlation to it?
Well, it would be easier to see it as. Well, first of all, yeah, it is. Then these questions are really difficult to answer because it depends on the level of the individual and how much they really know about all this stuff. Because a person who is aware of this completely will generally keep its children on the other plane, and so that being will have multiple inceptions, and those inceptions, if you have a third eye, you can see them around them. In fact, in ancient Chinese traditions, in Tibetan traditions, they call it Homunculus, the golden lotus. And it's basically about only bringing entities into the internal worlds and having them aid you that way. And they're basically your own children, versus the conception that there was always warnings about the conceptions is what I'm telling you. That's why the Bible begins with the whole act of conception being a problem, right? And it's because when you bring your idea then into a world of other ideas, that's what makes the limitations in this reality, is because not everyone's not agreeing that we want to fly. Everyone's not agreeing that we really want to be together. Everyone's not agreeing that we should do this with the water. We have different states of mind, different personalities. So that's why the whole reality has got limitations, because if one person says they don't want it and the other person says that they do want it, it just means that it never happens. So, and it happens in some places, doesn't happen in others. You got to find places that are more adapted to your environment. So let's continue with the child. So if the child makes it from inception to conception. Now, this is also hidden in the secrets of the incubus and succubus, which gets more into the darker side of this, because the darker side is that you can incept distorted life forms. And this is when lust does that sometimes, because it brings forth a child that the conception of what they're creating is completely off, but they still create it. And then it's distorted. This is the same as having an idea that you didn't really research. And then when you start being in that idea or that business or whatever, and then it starts falling apart, and then that could be seen as deformed. And this is because the shell is not perfect. It's not perfectly on phi. And this is why they say that the most attractive people are perfectly on, or what we find attractive are closer to phi. Okay? So what happens is that when this child is brought through, what it goes through is it goes through all the planetary spheres that are basically shaping, molding, and fashioning it. And this is what creates the person's zodiacal stance. So if you saw this, what you would see is this being coming through portals, okay? And these portals are created by the mother and father with the chakras joined and fully charged. They call that climax. And then the child goes through, and in the first portal, the geometries are very complex, but we can make it simple. Let's say it's a square. Now what that globulous form will be is a cube when it goes through that first womb. And then when it goes through the second womb, let's say that second womb is a pentagram. Now it'll be a cube wrapped in a shell. Then let's say that the next sphere is a hexagram. Now it's a cube wrapped in a shell, wrapped in a hexagram. And these are also giving it not only its characters and traits, because everything is being done through weights and measures, like how much of Saturn are they getting? How much of Venus are they getting? And then it's also, again, governing their senses. It's a being that's really unlimited. But now it has to be converted to something that can survive in this world without destroying us all. And this is why they also say what Cain was a destruction to the world. And even in the Gnostic tradition, Yaldabaoth, who is also Cain, was destructive to his mother because of that kind of being didn't really mesh well with a physical world. So that's why we always have to govern our children. No, you can't do this, and you shouldn't do that, and you need to share. There's all these rules because in this world, the child can't just go acting out like it's unlimited. It just can't. You see what I mean? So these are the facts of life. This is stuff that we have to look at from a whole nother level. Even if you wanted to, if you activate it here, you would destroy life. You would break Earth's water bag. If one human activates here too high and sends out an energetic charge, not an explosion. Explosions when they drop atom bombs, which are also, they rip holes in the reality. But implosion, and you quirk, you're going to open up a gate, and then anything can come through into that gate. And let me explain how this is for you to get this very simple. The boundaries or the walls are your skin. They're synonymous with your skin. Okay, so if I poke a hole in your skin, now something can get inside of you. And this is the other thing, you understand. I understand the body is so unique because certain parts of the body are never exposed. There's not even, it's like a vessel, an alchemical vessel, a vacuum. It never air gets there. Because and the skin is responsible for that. And that's why the skin is synonymous, especially in Kabbalah, with the serpent. Mm-hmm. Like there's positive, negative sides to everything, but the serpent is a sheath. It has swallowed everything. Everything is living inside of it. That's why it's also synonymous with woman, because all the baby is living inside of its mother. You see what I mean? So and then that's why it becomes synonymous with the act of creating and bringing something into a physical world, because the serpent was a metaphor for a woman with a womb, because she can concept. And without that, man cannot live in the physical worlds. But still, nobody knows where the first man and woman really came from. And it's because the first being was androgynous and did this act on its own, meaning it went through the procedures of basically, and that's why you see the mother and the son, right? And then in the mysteries, they tell you the son is actually the husband too. Because how realities really start anyway. Somebody had to have sex with somebody that was in the same family. I mean, that's how things get started. There's no other people. So these metaphors, again, it will show us that's the serpent eating its tail. It's us still producing ourselves from ourselves. So then when you're on the hunt, and this is where, it gets into key knowledge, and I want to close with this. When we're on the hunt for something external, okay, because remember, the reason why this act was really looked at as, maybe you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't divide yourself. So this is basically, you're talking to an androgen. It's got male and female in the same body, as we do now, but one of them is stronger than the other. So we're off balance. That's why you're either a male or a female. So I don't know if you should really divide. Why not? Well, if you divide, you're always going to be looking for your other half. And you're going to search and search and search and search and search. And you're going to then create time like that. Because when you can't find what you're looking for, that creates time. So this is what happens. The being says, I don't care what you're saying. Bam, birth something. So from that point, that thing that's birthed is not androgynous anymore. That's why I say Yaldabaoth is primarily a male, but also a female. And in the mysteries, that's why you get even the homosexuality playing a heavy role, because their deity that they're worshiping is hermaphroditic. That's why they show Baphomet as a hermaphrodite, but primarily a male. So the reason why it's important to understand this is that, imagine this. Before you were at a stage where you didn't need to go outside of yourself to sustain yourself. So everything that you needed was within. Now you're at a stage where you feel like everything that you need is actually on the outside. And because that's not where it is really anyway, you will continue to look for it forever until you realize that. And in that, they say, was one of the drawbacks to this thing, was that now we have a passion to find ourselves. So we constantly go and try to find the opposite race, or opposite sex, and we do everything that we can to find that opposing force. And opposite sex doesn't mean whether it's a male or a female that you're looking for, because there's some people that are gendered the other way. It's looking for something outside of oneself that is supposed to complete oneself's immortality. Immortality. Because remember, remember I told you the commanders wanted to be immortal on the physical plane. They were already immortal, but not on the physical plane. So the thing that was created was to become immortal on the physical plane by living through yourself. Birth continuously. So basically you dive back in. Every time that, as a male, when he goes into a woman, he's diving back into the matrix again, and then going to bring himself out again, hold himself. And then you see in the same thing, male, female, they're going to basically be dealing with themselves continuously. And so it's, again, we're running out of hour, but it's deep stuff to really think about. And then to close this in and open it with the children is, see, that's why I started the Secret Energy, because I couldn't find anything out there that was really ready to deal with this like this. Like there was always, you're not supposed to say this and all this and that. That's why I just branched off. And that's also why I stopped, especially recently, doing a lot of talking, because I'm just more into action. And what's being built it's a step-by-step process of this awakening. And we can say what it is because I've been keeping all the notes for the last 5 or 6 years of every single process of what I felt, what was going on, what I read, who showed up, what their name was, etymology, what it connect to, etc. Then you also have the connection, though, which is more important, because if everyone's waiting to hear from Sevan in order to get the message, and we got a problem, it's going to bog down with me, and it has. Like I need an agent or something. Like my career is way beyond what I can actually manage, and I'm doing everything that I can to do that. But it's better for me to just create what's going to allow each one of us to connect while moving out the things that separate us. like overlapping. You get a person who's level 1 in there with a level 12. They're not even going to be on the same levels anyway. So the conversation is probably going to annoy the level 12 and then make the level 1 feel jealous. That's called overlapping. You see what I mean? But at the same time, as a level 1, if you know that there's a level 12 chat room and you just need a password to it, and you can get the password once you complete all these levels, you can guarantee that whoever's in that chat room is going to be able to tell you more about what's going on. But how the curriculum is designed, by the time you get to level 12, you're not going to need nobody to know what's going on. You're just going to be looking for your spiritual family, which is really everyone, but more so people that are biorhythmically connected to you. So what this is a bridge. Because there are people, just like me and you're talking right now, we were going to talk anyway. And the bridge was Skype today. And because I'm also reaching out more tentacles, per se, into the world, saying, hey, I know this knowledge. If you want to know it, I have no problem with introducing it to you and explaining it to you, or actually refreshing you about what something you already know. So imagine when you get something where all the people that are connected that way, that have been looking for each other, because I know what's going on. People are looking for each other. And then what the division has done is put walls in between these people. That's the wall that Dul Qarnayn built. If you read the Quran, the Dul Qarnayn built a wall. Dul Qarnayn means two horn. They thought it was Alexander the Great, but that's not Alexander. It's the deity inside of Alexander, which is Yaldabaoth, two horn, MLK, or Moloch. You see, and this stuff gets so deep, nobody can really say, yeah, it was being done to us. Nobody can. Like, I got off that. I never even got on it. My first papers were Solomon and Menelik and Sheba, and what really happened over there with those cows, and those horn god and the Minotaur and the maze and all that. That didn't come from England, actually, or Europe. Europe is Yoruba. That's where that word comes from. So, I mean, what are we talking about here? Is what I'm saying, and that's how I came at this. I was like, well, shit. Before I read David Icke, before I read any Michael Sarians or any of these people, I was already in the ancient books because I didn't think that anyone knew about what was really going on. And that's why I need to go read about it, or else everything would have been changed already. Because of what I experienced through mantras, took me into a whole nother world. And then in other things that I realized that, like paper can do things unbelievable. So little mechanics, things that never even discussed in school, can shatter realities and build them all over again. Worlds can be stopped and started again. You can take yourself out of this world and into another where everyone is still there, acting the same way they are now. There'll only be subtle differences and changes, mainly that you can get your ground on, meaning that you can actually succeed in that world. And all that can happen within the time that you're transferred from your sleep in this world to your sleep in another world, meaning without a blink of an eye. You won't even know what's happening until you realize, if you're actually taking all the notes about everything, that some stuff is missing. Some people don't have the same name. Some people's birthdays are off. But don't count on them knowing. And that's why the person that knows is got this, it's a deep thing. It's really about you for a while, and then you find others. And then that's what the platform is that it's actually creating the connection between others. So that way we can go ahead and take this thing to an entirely different level, because we're world builders. And again, I don't see this as anyone else's responsibility to bring this about. And that's what's allowed me to go to this level, because I would have conked out a long time ago, because we didn't have a blueprint of how to build it. The blueprint was lost. When we asked, well, how are we going to bring everything together? Everybody was just trying to separate. And so this is what it is. And now, like, man, I'm super excited. So I don't want people to get the inclination that anything in this conversation, which is a relationship, it's all ships and crafts, that anything that is going out of me is about fear of this. Because this started with me wanting to know what happens after you die. And now that I know what happens after you die, which is you just go to the corresponding frequency that you're on, and you can actually prepare for death because you do it every night anyway, and then you can even get more intrinsic on it. The more you feed that mind, body, and soul with the things that it's going to rotate all that in. You just keep pumping it in. Don't read foolishness, but don't focus so much on having to understand it. Just keep a good stream of stuff that's enlightening you going on in the mind versus things that are taking you into that frequency, that lower frequency. And then when that starts to fill the system more, it starts to do that at night. And then it's probably already going on now. Then 3 o'clock in the morning, you're on some high level stuff. It may not be able to remember it around 5 o'clock, but 3 o'clock is just breaking down the entire quasar equation of the entire spectrum itself. And then when you wake up, you got that data. And so that's how I also remember When you access these planes, you also become a bridge for bringing that into this world. And then what you've done is you become the ancestor. And that's what I was trying to explain the other day to everyone. I said, look, the biggest problem here is because we're disconnected from the ancestors. But this doesn't mean it's because we don't have any old people around us. It's because we haven't made that connection to ourselves in the future. And when we do that, then we bring out the ancestors. So then when somebody's talking to me, they're just talking to the ancestors. And that's how it works. And then when I talk to other people, I'm talking to my ancestors. And when I build that framework, when we build that framework back together, that's the foundation now all these people are going to stand on, all of them. Now remember, what you're capable of doing is way beyond whatever has been done to this point. That's the great thing, because maybe you get some space credits for it. But what I'm saying is that the highest level of power here is really beneath you. I've completely examined this being, smacked the being in the face. It doesn't have power. It doesn't utilize that power. Its power is electricity. You see, like it actually put its power into physical powers. That's why they cut off the power. It's like, damn, we don't have no power. But I can go get a generator. Spiritual power comes from you, and that spiritual power usurp all this. And this is the next stage, and then I'll conclude with this really because it's the next stage of our entire consciousness. Weapons do not have effect against this kind of being. If you really want to know where to set your mind, you set your mind in being in harmony with all the elements. Because once you're in harmony with all the elements, it doesn't matter what they're trying to do. It just doesn't work. You experience this first on a subtle level. Then, depending on how the future turns out, you may experience it on different kind of levels. But what I'm talking about is they could take the gun and have it right there and pull the trigger, and it just wouldn't do anything. Then, if you could take a picture to look on their face, that'll make me happy. And it's if I don't take the picture first. And it's because when their weapons no longer have effect, that's when they'll experience fear. You see, like right now, when they hide behind all the weapons, they don't feel scared. But when the weapons don't work, because they're dealing with the real wonder weapon, and this is what was hidden. Like this is what Hitler marched armies across the Ural for, which was the knowledge of one Waf. That one Wafa was a man, a human, a being, a woman, that had activated themselves into a wonder weapon. And this wonder weapon cowered all that had weapons. And thus all the wars ended. And that was known as the Vajra. It's actually a physical symbol of that being. It's not the actual Vajra staff. It's the physical implementation of a balanced being that has their energy charged up. So then what happened was they took this knowledge. Because Hitler has his own plight. You have to watch the greatest story, I believe, never told. It's about Hitler. And about how basically he was just protecting all those people from the Russians because they had already run them dry from everything. And they also had to deal with the elements, so it made cruel people. But the reality, the same thing that we're dealing with Baghdad over there now with them telling us that they're terrorists was the same thing of what they're telling us with Hitler. Because they were in dire straits because the Jewish people were taxing them too, just like they're doing us now. Not saying I'm a Hitler sympathizer, because he tried to solve a situation the same way that it was being caused. Mm-hmm. But just remember, what was sequestered was the knowledge of the wonder weapon. And what they did was they took the knowledge of the wonder weapon and then they brought it to the United States once they faked the loss of the war, and then they created the atom bomb. Because instead of using the knowledge, like I told you earlier, to activate humanity, they turned it 180 degrees. That means you turn the star upside down. That's Crowleyism. They turn a 7-pointed star upside down. And then what they activated from that point was explosion rather than implosion. Implosion allows you to quirk. You drive all your energy centers into yourself until it charges you up and then say hello to the new realities. Explosion is when you explode and basically send ripples across reality and destroy and shatter things. Mm-hmm. So the knowledge of implosion was what the Tibetans, and they still know, the Lamas know, because implosion lets you time travel, implosion lets you lucid dream, implosion lets you feed on your own energy. You're not even really eating. That's all implosion. Explosion is what the reality is dealing with now. So they took the knowledge, they turned it 180 degrees, they figured out all the elements that were mentioned in there inside of man, they found them in the physical reality, and then they put them together in stages. And if you read the ignition of a nuclear bomb, it goes in stages where basically particles are being slammed together. So the same thing in our reality, that same knowledge. And then remember, this template this is the kind of thing they talk about in the cartoons that you should never let fall in the hands of evil. Because once it does, it could be used for multiple things. Now, in the reality, it's also being used to slam other grand worlds into each other. You slam an entire nation into another nation, you see, creating a huge explosion and ripple effects beyond the limits. So what has to happen is that, or gets to happen, the imploder. Imploder can bring all of this back in together, and we're going to do it together. Like, this is not something that I don't have to street dream about this, because I got several stages to what I can do about the situation. And I'm doing the least right now because of their levels of aggression. And what I mean by that is the least, meaning that this way of explaining to people, creating websites and stuff like that, this is giving everyone opportunity to learn the knowledge and expand on their own. If it gets too crazy, which I feel like that means, too crazy to me is when another being breaks realm. That's when, if someone comes to the planet and actually says, or displays a certain level of power, and then uses that power a malevolent way, that's for me the call. Because at that point, I have no choice but to take my body into a couple stages higher than where it is that I know I can reach, but are very shaky. Meaning that it's just like that. Like higher levels of spirituality and energetics, it has pros and cons in a sense. It's like, it's not something to play with, is what I'm saying. But I feel like as long as there are no other beings vividly showing that they have another kind of power, that the world still has a great chance right now of learning who they really are and what they're really about. And the reason why I'm explaining it that way is because if a being comes forward and has a great deal of power, and that power is connected to any kind of religious system, that means the end of our world. Because all the people are going to go and wander after that.
Slavery.
Right. Exactly, brother. It's a whole nother level of slavery, because people are not going to feel like, and this is what the king did. If you understand what the Khan did, is it had another level of power because it was one of the first emissions from the creative force. So all other beings that came after that, which were really its children in a sense, but not like you, my daddy. Because if you understand it, it's like we're still all the same thing. So if I came out of you, I still have my own, just like your children. They got their own rights, and they're who they want to be, right? But in this case, it's one being saying, well, I'm your God. I'm your king. Are you going to accept that? Are you going to set me over you? And then the people say, well, yeah, we accept you over us. So this depresses them. Not only do they literally get depressed, it also pushes them down a couple frequencies, because it pushes them down at least to a lower frequency than that being is on. And then that's called dominion. And that's basically under the moon. Anything under the moon is under dominion. And that's why, this whole thing is dynamic. So what we'll have to do is we'll have to get together at some other point. And like I said, you just let me know what you want to do. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. We danced around some things today. I would like to look at today's conversation, because I love the build, as we hopped into one of these hovercrafts or whatever, and we just took a view of the knowledge.
A little
tour. Just a little tour of the knowledge of different areas, because many of these things we need to hone in on directly. But I'm telling you, like, if you want to do something, like, I'm here. Like, I like to at least get off a recording once a week at least. And then right now, because I don't want to boot the old things up, and because I got the streaming and all that stuff that I can do from the house, but because I don't want to really get into that part of things, because I'm building a platform, if someone else wants to host it like you're hosting right now, and then you can take either today's conversation and things that you want to know and then put it into some kind of SketchUp, then we can go and build on that as shows, and that will be a great. And I know it'll bring the views to what you're doing, which I'm in support of, and it'll also allow, it's just mutual on every single level. So, and I think that also this stuff is fresh. Like, I didn't even start cracking the can on what I really know, and it's just going to be one of those things where we're gonna have to go through this like adults, and we're gonna have to go through this together. Okay. But if we're going to have to go through it, and like most people are still standing back, they don't want to be like the ones who really jump something like that off. So it's just for me. I can take the weight. I don't mean it doesn't. It only increases me. So I'm just mad that I'm hogging up all the space credits these days.
That's what's up, man.
Yeah. I definitely appreciate it, and there's so much that I want to do, and what I learned when you were talking is that I do want to research it, so that what I want to give to the world, is going to be valuable, Yeah. And not just me giving it, but just sharing it, because it's, I don't know. I'm lost for words right now because I'm really excited.
And plus, a lot of time has transpired. I get like that about after 3 hours. I just disintegrate. I just disintegrate before everyone's eyes. I don't know if I go on a high frequency or a low frequency. I don't know where I'm at after a while. I'm just like, what's my name again? But yeah, I mean, there's obviously a little bit to take in, but it's positive and intense. It drives our energy, and we see clearly that there's something that we can do in the future with this. And not to, after these kind of conversations, you're always like, but not that I'm not present. Well, I'm right here now, but you know what I mean. It's just something that we can build on. And so let's look forward to building it. And then obviously, like I said, I should be done within about a month. Like I'm really, really pushing it. I just want it to be at standard when I do open it up. I don't just want to open it up. But at that point, there's going to be so many things that you'll be able to see there that you can literally get involved in and do. And it's just, it's just dynamic. You know what I mean? It's like it's open source, so it's set up to where people can have their own input. They can put different things in. They can perfect things, and of course, you can go through the courses, all those kind of things. You can connect with people that are in your area, people that are on that same wavelength as you. So all that is available there. You can even have your own, like if you do consultations or something like that, you can build your whole little area that allows you to provide your wares, you know what I mean? So that way you're planting your seeds in fertile ground. So I think that this kind of stuff should have been started a long time ago. It's very difficult for a person to have spiritual and technical abilities.
Yeah.
They tend to not
make
mate well with each other.
I was like, when you gave this analogy of like how there's people that are talking, but most of them haven't done it.
Yeah.
And then you have the ones that have done it, they rarely talk.
Yeah.
but then when you do have the ones that do it and they talk, everybody listens. And then I was like, then you got somebody like you that's that's doing those things, and then you have those skills that you have, which is the technological skills, which is what the age that we're in. That's what everybody's learning through.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I would say that that's
knowledge.
one of the basic differences between the structure of this message. And also I'm into it. So I've been into different fields of life too. Like, my past and my history with the world is quite diverse. So I'm awake over here. And then also I know about pizza, meaning that there's some things that people don't like. And if you try to feed it to them, don't expect for them to eat it. And that's a big part of this, is working on your toolbox. Like if, they didn't like that, okay, let me go back to the drawing board, rather than they just going to take it like I'm going to give it, how I'm going to prepare it. Because once you can prepare right, and aesthetics is a big thing too. It's like what your imagery and things like that really do count. And that stuff, of course, bogs down a lot of time. So you need that team. And so trust me, like what I'm really building this for is to put the team together. And then that way it's not, a person's either doing too much or a person's not getting things done because they don't have certain kind of qualifications or abilities. And then as far as the monetized thing, that's what I figured out too, because that's another key component to this, because nobody has time to spend hours and hours without any reciprocation, nor should they. That's kind of vampiric. So this it's really dynamic. And so I'm definitely looking forward to introducing it and unveiling it to you. And then obviously, you know me directly, you have a direct line to me. Anything that you want to schedule in the future, especially within the next, I'm moving on the 15th. So after that, at least a week or two after that, then I'll be available again. And then you have my, again, direct line here on the Skype. So if you need to ask me any questions or get some information on something, like, there's nothing that we don't have. And that's really also what this platform does, is it puts all the imagery, all the videos, and all that stuff together with the message. Because it's not like we don't have this stuff. Like, I'm not pulling this just out of nowhere. I do have the as below correspondences to what I'm talking about. So that's what makes it, solid. Also, I want you to check, this is comedy right here, but I'm dropping this video over. I want you to check that out, and you might want to accept it after you stop your recording. That way it doesn't bog down your bandwidth, but check that out. It's about being in the now, but it's funny. It's just a funny little clip.
Okay, we definitely check it out.
All right.
And I hope to, keep the communication,
most
up
certainly.
to date.
I mean, I would definitely hope so. I see everything as new and everything as different, like every day, and so I'm always looking. That's why I say, I'll do the call, because I never know who I'm going to meet, like, and who, I'm looking for people. You see what I mean? So if you're looking for someone, I feel you.
This is like so exciting. We were talking about, like, we wish that we knew about this 2 years or whatever ago, but we know it now, and we were like, what we want to create for ourselves is to be a part, to push that mission out with you, or as you know, as a team, all of us, you know.
Yeah, I mean, and that's definitely doable. I mean, as we go more and more into this, you'll see that it'll be very clear because, you know, I just designed it like that because I figured out what kind of went wrong with the first platform, if anything. I mean, it hosts itself and it does its thing, but it could be better. And so I poured it all into that, and I'm sure what you'll see, you'll be very pleased. And it also will give you ideas of exactly what we can do because, you know, I want to jump off even something in the morning, like every morning, maybe 30, 45 minutes. That's just like the word of the day in a sense to, you know, setting the projection right. And, you know, we have, you know, there's thousands of people in the world that are aware of us and millions of impressions over the internet, but it's not been honed in until now. And so this is a good time, though, because we had to run a couple circuits to really figure out what we were doing. You know what I mean? Because you can't say you know it all in the beginning. We'll never know it all. But it can perfect itself as we get the template down, which is pretty much in stone now. We only can enhance that, like, oh, let's put this over here, let's add this to that, let's add this to that. And it allows that kind of application. I also sent you a chart that's, it's basically, it's kind of gives you an idea of how when worlds are programmed into a certain area of the person's body, how that looks on a geometric level when it's an artificial world. And so that's called the Diagrams Banner 1. I sent that to you, which you can also accept that.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm excited to look at these clips and the information you sent.
Okay.
And I'm sorry.
No, it's just this is the uncomfortable point. It's when we have to say goodbye. It's like talking to a lover or something. It's like, all right, you go ahead and go first. You go first.
You know, you're trying to end a call with somebody and just all this extra just put in there like, okay, well, I hope you have a good day.
I call it the protocols. All right. Well,
you enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay, you too.
After you move, just look forward to a lot of messages.
Okay, for sure. And then obviously you can link with me now. You know, if you have any ideas, you need something, just let me know.
Okay, definitely.
Okay. All right. Well, it's great to meet you.
You too. Right. I'm so excited.
Wholeness.
Wholeness.